Sarah Martinez stepped off the dusty transport truck, her pristine white nursing uniform already attracting curious glances from the hardened soldiers around her. The military base in Afghanistan stretched before her like a small city of tan-colored buildings in constant activity. At 24, she looked even younger, with her hair pulled back in regulation style and medical bag clutched tightly in her hands. "Great, another fresh-faced rookie," muttered Sergeant Thompson, watching from the shade of the medical tent. His weathered face showed the kind of skepticism that came from seeing too many inexperienced personnel arrive with good intentions but little practical knowledge of war zone realities. Sarah had graduated at the top of her nursing program just 6 months earlier. Her professors praised her quick thinking and steady hands during emergency simulations, but this wasn't a classroom, and the other medical staff could sense her nervousness despite her attempts to appear confident. Dr. Patricia Wells, the head of medical operations, emerged from the main medical facility to greet the new arrival. At 45, she had served in 3 different conflict zones and could spot inexperience from a mile away. "You must be Martinez," she said, extending a firm handshake. "Welcome to Forward Operating Base Phoenix. I hope you're ready for what we do here." "Yes, ma'am, I've studied all the protocols and I'm prepared to serve wherever needed." Her voice carried the earnestness of someone who had memorized every medical textbook but had never actually treated a soldier with shrapnel wounds or performed surgery under mortar fire. The first few days proved challenging for Sarah. The other nurses, led by experienced veteran Corporal Janet Price, watched her struggle with the basic realities of battlefield medicine. When the first casualties arrived from a roadside bombing, Sarah froze momentarily at the sight of injuries far worse than anything she had encountered in civilian hospitals. "Move faster, Martinez," Janet called out sharply as Sarah hesitated while helping transfer a wounded soldier. Out here, every second counts. The criticism stung, but Sarah knew it was deserved. She was clearly out of her element. Word spread quickly through the base about the rookie nurse who looked like she might faint at the sight of blood. Soldiers began referring to her as college girl behind her back, and some openly questioned whether she belonged in such a dangerous posting. The nickname wasn't meant to be kind. Captain David Rodriguez, the base commander, observed these early struggles with concern. He had requested experienced medical personnel, not someone who appeared to need more training. During his evening briefings with Dr. Wells, he expressed his doubts about keeping Sarah on the team. "She's got potential," Dr. Wells defended, though she too had noticed Sarah's difficulties. "Sometimes it just takes time to adjust to the reality of combat medicine. Not everyone adapts at the same pace." Sarah was acutely aware of the whispers and sideways glances. Every mistake felt magnified, every moment of hesitation noticed by her colleagues. She spent her off-duty hours studying additional medical texts and practicing procedures, determined to prove herself worthy of her position. The breakthrough came during her second week when a convoy returned with multiple casualties from an IED attack. The medical team was overwhelmed, and Sarah found herself assigned to treat a young soldier with severe burns. Something clicked in that moment. Her training took over, and she worked with steady precision, cleaning wounds and administering pain medication while offering reassuring words to the frightened soldier. "Nice work, Martinez," Janet admitted grudgingly after the crisis had passed. It was the first real acknowledgement Sarah had received from her peers. The compliment meant everything to her. As days turned into weeks, Sarah began finding her rhythm. She learned to compartmentalize the horror of battlefield injuries and focus on the medical tasks at hand. Her natural compassion, initially seen as a weakness, proved valuable when dealing with traumatized soldiers who needed both physical treatment and emotional support. The base operated under constant threat. Intelligence reports regularly warned of insurgent activity in the surrounding area, and everyone remained alert for possible attacks. Security protocols were strict, with regular drills and checkpoint procedures that Sarah had memorized but never experienced in practice. What the medical staff and other personnel didn't know was that Sarah's background included more than just nursing school. Before pursuing her medical career, she had spent 2 years in a specialized training program that few people knew about. Her father, a retired Navy SEAL, had insisted she learn self-defense and tactical awareness from a young age. What appeared to be a sheltered college graduate was actually someone with extensive, though hidden, combat training. Sarah had deliberately kept this background secret, wanting to be judged on her medical abilities rather than her unusual preparation. She feared that mentioning her tactical training would make her colleagues think she was trying to be something she wasn't, or that she didn't take her nursing role seriously enough. During quiet moments between medical emergencies, Sarah would sometimes catch herself automatically noting security weaknesses or tactical positions around the base. Old habits from her training would surface, causing her to unconsciously evaluate sightlines, escape routes, and defensive positions. She pushed these thoughts aside, focusing instead on her medical duties and the gradual acceptance she was earning from her colleagues. The other nurses began including her in their informal conversations, and even some of the soldiers started greeting her by name rather than avoiding eye contact. Sarah felt like she was finally proving herself as a competent medical professional, even if she still carried the rookie label. Late one evening, as Sarah finished organizing medical supplies in the storage area, she overheard two soldiers discussing intelligence reports about increased insurgent activity in the region. The conversation made her instinctively more alert, her tactical training causing her to mentally review the base's defensive positions and evacuation procedures. Wells noticed Sarah's improved performance and growing confidence. "You're really finding your place here," she told Sarah one afternoon after a particularly difficult surgery. "I think you might have what it takes for this kind of work after all." Sarah smiled at the praise, but part of her mind remained focused on security concerns. Her father's training had taught her to always be aware of potential threats, and something about the recent intelligence reports felt different, more urgent than previous warnings. The base commander continued his evening briefings, discussing patrol schedules and security measures with his senior staff. Sarah wasn't included in these meetings, being considered non-essential personnel for tactical discussions. If they had known about her background, they might have valued her input on defensive preparations. As her first month at the base concluded, Sarah had successfully transitioned from an uncertain rookie to a respected member of the medical team. Her colleagues no longer questioned her abilities, and soldiers began requesting her specifically for treatment when given a choice. She had found her place in the complex social hierarchy of the military base. However, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her real test was still coming. The tactical awareness ingrained by years of training kept whispering warnings that she tried to ignore while focusing on her medical responsibilities. She had no way of knowing that this intuition would soon prove absolutely crucial for everyone's survival. The base settled into its evening routine as Sarah completed her shift, unaware that armed insurgents were already moving into position around the perimeter, planning an attack that would transform the rookie nurse into something entirely unexpected. The alarm pierced through the pre-dawn darkness like a knife, jolting everyone at Forward Operating Base Phoenix from sleep. Sarah's eyes snapped open instantly, her body already moving before her mind fully processed the situation. Years of ingrained training had taught her to respond to threats with immediate action, though her colleagues assumed her quick response was simply adrenaline. "This is not a drill. All personnel to defensive positions." Captain Rodriguez's voice boomed over the intercom system. The urgency in his tone made it clear that this was the real attack they had all been preparing for during countless drills. Sarah rolled out of her bunk and quickly dressed, her movements efficient and purposeful in a way that would have surprised anyone who still thought of her as an inexperienced rookie. While other medical staff fumbled with their equipment in the darkness, she had already grabbed her medical bag and was mentally reviewing the base's layout and defensive positions. The medical facility became a hub of frantic activity as Dr. Wells began organizing for mass casualties. "Martinez, get the trauma bay ready for multiple patients," she ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. "This looks like a coordinated assault." Through the reinforced windows, muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly fireworks. The attackers had chosen their timing perfectly, striking during the shift change when security was momentarily reduced. Intelligence reports had underestimated both their numbers and their level of organization. Sarah worked alongside Janet and the other nurses, preparing medical equipment while explosions rocked the base. Each blast sent tremors through the building, causing supplies to rattle on shelves and dust to fall from the ceiling. The sound of automatic weapons fire grew closer with each passing minute. "They are inside the perimeter," reported Sergeant Thompson over the radio, his voice tight with concern. "Multiple breach points. We need immediate reinforcement at the eastern checkpoint." The news sent a chill through the medical staff. The attackers weren't just conducting a hit-and-run operation. They intended to overrun the entire base. Captain Rodriguez coordinated the defense from the command center, but it quickly became clear that the attack was more sophisticated than anything they had faced before. The insurgents had studied the base's routines and weaknesses, timing their assault to maximize chaos and confusion. Dr. Wells, came an urgent transmission. We've got wounded coming in from checkpoint 3. Heavy casualties. The radio crackled with static and distant explosions as the defensive positions came under increasingly heavy fire. Sarah helped prepare the operating tables while fighting off a growing sense of unease. Her tactical training was screaming warnings that she couldn't voice without revealing her background. The attack pattern suggested this wasn't a random assault, but a carefully planned operation designed to capture rather than simply destroy the base. The first wounded soldiers arrived on stretchers, their injuries severe and requiring immediate attention. Sarah threw herself into the medical work, her nursing training taking priority over the tactical awareness that continued whispering in the back of her mind. Blood soaked through field dressings as she worked to stabilize patients for surgery. "More incoming!" Janet called out as another group of casualties was rushed through the medical facility doors. The volume of wounded indicated that the defensive positions were being systematically overwhelmed. Sarah's hands moved with practiced efficiency, starting IV lines and assessing injuries, while part of her mind cataloged the deteriorating tactical situation. Wells performed emergency surgery on the most critical patients, while Sarah and the other nurses managed triage and stabilization. The medical facility filled with the sounds of pain and urgency as more soldiers were brought in with gunshot wounds, shrapnel injuries, and burns from explosive devices. "The western perimeter is compromised," reported Lieutenant Hayes over the radio. "We're falling back to secondary positions." Sarah's training immediately recognized this as a sign that the base's outer defenses had failed. The attackers were pushing deeper into the facility with each passing minute. An explosion much closer than the others shook the medical building violently, shattering windows and sending equipment tumbling to the floor. Emergency lighting flickered on as the main power system failed, casting everything in an eerie red glow that made the medical work even more challenging. That was the armory, someone reported over the radio. Sarah knew that losing the weapons depot was a critical blow to the base's defensive capabilities. Her tactical awareness painted an increasingly grim picture of their situation, but she continued focusing on her medical duties while fighting the urge to voice her concerns. The sound of gunfire grew steadily closer as defensive positions continued falling to the attackers. Sarah could hear shouts and running footsteps outside the medical facility as soldiers repositioned to establish new defensive lines. The organized nature of the attack suggested that the insurgents had excellent intelligence about the base's layout and procedures. "Martinez, I need you to prep the emergency evacuation supplies," Dr. Wells ordered, her voice remaining steady despite the deteriorating situation. "If we have to evacuate casualties, everything needs to be ready for transport." Sarah immediately understood that this was preparation for the worst-case scenario where the base could no longer be defended. While organizing the evacuation medical kits, Sarah caught fragments of radio transmissions that painted an increasingly desperate picture. Multiple defensive positions had been abandoned, and the attackers were methodically working their way toward the base's critical facilities, including the medical center. "Command center is under direct fire," Captain Rodriguez reported, his transmission interrupted by automatic weapons fire. "We're down to the final defensive perimeter." Sarah's tactical training told her that this meant the base was effectively lost and that evacuation was no longer an option. Janet noticed Sarah's intense focus on the radio communications. "You look like you understand what's happening out there better than most of us," she observed quietly while they worked on a patient with multiple shrapnel wounds. "Most nurses don't pay that much attention to tactical reports." Sarah deflected the observation with a shrug, not wanting to explain her background while dealing with wounded soldiers. "I just want to know how much time we have before they reach us," she replied, which was true but not the complete truth about her analytical capabilities. The attacks were becoming more coordinated and intense, suggesting that the insurgents had planned this operation for months. Sarah's training allowed her to recognize the hallmarks of a professional military assault rather than the typical guerrilla tactics used by most insurgent groups in the region. A new transmission crackled over the radio. All remaining personnel, this is Rodriguez. The base is being overrun. Prepare for last stand defensive positions. The words sent a chill through everyone in the medical facility. They had always known this was a possibility, but facing the reality was entirely different from theoretical preparation. Wells gathered her medical staff for a brief meeting. Listen carefully. If they breach the medical facility, our priority is protecting our patients. We're non-combatants, but that doesn't mean they'll respect medical neutrality. Her words carried the weight of someone who had seen the brutal realities of war in multiple theaters. Sarah nodded along with the others, but her mind was already working through contingency plans that went far beyond passive resistance. Her tactical training had prepared her for exactly this kind of scenario, though she had never imagined she would face it while serving as a medical professional rather than in a combat role. The sound of boots in the corridors outside grew louder and more urgent as soldiers established defensive positions around the medical facility. Sarah could hear furniture being moved to create barricades and weapons being checked and loaded for what might be their final stand. "They're at the main gate," came a desperate radio transmission. "Heavy weapons, professional equipment. This isn't a typical insurgent attack." Sarah had already reached that conclusion based on the tactical pattern she was observing, but hearing it confirmed by the defenders made the situation even more real. As the final defensive preparations were completed, Sarah found herself in a position she had never expected to face. Her medical training demanded that she focus on treating wounded soldiers and protecting patients, but her tactical background was screaming that passive resistance would not be sufficient to survive what was coming. The moment that would change everything was rapidly approaching, though none of her colleagues had any idea that their rookie nurse was about to become something entirely different from what they had believed her to be. The explosion that destroyed the main entrance to the medical facility marked the end of Sarah Martinez's carefully maintained facade. As smoke and debris filled the air, armed insurgents poured through the breach, their faces covered and weapons trained on everyone inside. The transformation that followed would shock everyone who thought they knew the rookie nurse. "Everyone on the ground now," shouted the lead attacker in heavily accented English. His tactical vest and professional equipment confirmed Sarah's assessment that these weren't typical insurgents, but trained military operators. Dr. Wells and the other medical staff immediately complied, dropping to their knees with hands raised. Sarah appeared to follow suit, but her movement was different. Instead of the panicked compliance shown by her colleagues, she moved with fluid precision, her body automatically positioning itself for optimal response angles. Years of tactical training had conditioned her reactions in ways that even she hadn't fully realized until this moment. The attackers spread out through the medical facility with practiced efficiency, securing corners and establishing fields of fire. Sarah counted at least 12 hostiles, all carrying modern assault rifles and wearing body armor that indicated significant financial backing. Her tactical assessment happened in seconds while her colleagues were still processing the shock of being under direct attack. "Separate the medical staff from the wounded," ordered the apparent leader, a tall man whose bearing suggested military background. "We need the medical personnel alive for now." Sarah's training immediately recognized this as confirmation that the attack was about capturing valuable assets rather than simple destruction. As the other nurses were herded toward one corner of the facility, Sarah allowed herself to be moved with the group while her mind rapidly calculated angles, distances, and opportunities. The attackers had made their first tactical error by assuming that all medical personnel were non-combatants without defensive capabilities. Janet, crouched beside Sarah, whispered urgently, "What do you think they want with us?" Her voice shook with fear as she watched the armed men systematically searching the facility and securing the wounded soldiers who couldn't be moved. "Information," Sarah replied quietly, her assessment based on tactical analysis rather than speculation. "They want to know about base operations, security procedures, maybe use us as leverage." What she didn't say was that her training had taught her to recognize interrogation scenarios and the brutal methods typically employed. Wells tried to maintain some authority in the situation. "We're medical personnel protected under the Geneva Convention," she declared to the lead attacker. "You have no right to detain us or threaten our patients." Her words carried the moral authority of international law but little practical weight in the current circumstances. The leader laughed coldly. "Your conventions mean nothing here, Doctor. You will provide us with the information we require, or your patients will suffer the consequences." His threat was delivered with the casual brutality of someone accustomed to using violence as a tool of persuasion. Sarah watched the tactical positioning of the attackers while appearing to focus on the leader's words. 3 men guarded the main breach point. 2 covered the wounded soldiers, and others were positioned at windows and secondary entrances. Their professional spacing and overlapping fields of fire indicated extensive training, but Sarah's background allowed her to identify subtle weaknesses in their formation. "Start with her," the leader pointed directly at Sarah. The young one looked scared enough to cooperate quickly. His assessment was based on her apparent youth and inexperience, exactly the impression she had been fighting since arriving at the base. Now that misperception might provide the tactical advantage she needed. 2 attackers approached to escort Sarah to an improvised interrogation area they had set up near the pharmacy. As they reached for her arms, Sarah's transformation began. The scared rookie nurse disappeared, replaced by someone whose movements carried the deadly precision of extensive combat training. Sarah's first motion was a blur of controlled violence that caught the nearest attacker completely off guard. Her elbow strike crushed his larynx while her other hand stripped the weapon from his grip in a move so fast that the other hostiles barely registered what had happened. The man dropped without making a sound, unconscious before he hit the floor. The second attacker had just enough time to realize the threat before Sarah's acquired weapon fired 3 precise rounds into his center mass. Her stance, grip, and targeting were those of someone with thousands of hours of firearms training, not a medical professional who had supposedly never handled weapons in combat. "Take cover." "Doctor!" Wells screamed as Sarah moved with fluid grace between defensive positions, using medical equipment and furniture as concealment while engaging targets with mechanical precision. Each shot was placed with the accuracy of someone trained to kill efficiently and without hesitation. The other attackers responded with professional discipline, but they were now facing an opponent they hadn't expected and couldn't immediately categorize. Sarah's medical knowledge of human anatomy combined with her tactical training to create devastating effectiveness. She knew exactly where to place shots for maximum stopping power. Janet stared in stunned disbelief as the colleague she had known as a hesitant rookie systematically neutralized armed opponents with movements that belonged in elite military units rather than medical facilities. "Who are you?" she whispered, though her words were lost in the sound of gunfire. Sarah flanked left while laying down, covering fire, forcing the remaining attackers to split their attention between multiple threats. Her tactical awareness allowed her to predict their movements and position herself for maximum advantage while minimizing exposure to return fire. "She's military!" shouted one of the attackers in his native language, finally recognizing that they faced trained opposition rather than helpless medical personnel. The realization came too late to significantly alter their tactical disadvantage, but it explained why their carefully planned operation was falling apart. The leader attempted to re-establish control by threatening the wounded soldiers, but Sarah had anticipated this move. Her next series of shots eliminated the guards positioned near the patients, while she simultaneously moved to a position that gave her clear lines of sight on all remaining targets. Wells watched in amazement as Sarah moved through the medical facility like someone intimately familiar with close-quarters combat. Every step was purposeful, every shot deliberate, and every tactical decision made with the confidence of extensive training and experience. "Martinez, behind you!" Janet called out as one of the attackers attempted to flank Sarah's position, but Sarah had already identified the threat through peripheral awareness, spinning to engage the target before he could bring his weapon to bear. Her response time was that of someone whose reflexes had been honed through countless hours of combat drills. The remaining attackers began falling back toward their entry point, recognizing that their operation had encountered unexpected and overwhelming resistance. Sarah pressed her advantage, systematically eliminating threats while protecting both the medical staff and the wounded soldiers who couldn't defend themselves. Within minutes, the medical facility fell silent, except for the groans of wounded patients and the shocked breathing of the medical staff who had witnessed their rookie colleagues' incredible transformation. Bodies of the attackers lay scattered throughout the facility, testament to Sarah's deadly efficiency and tactical superiority. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. "Medical facility, report your status." We heard weapons fire. His transmission came from the command center. where the remaining defenders were still fighting their own battles against the coordinated attack. Sarah retrieved the radio with steady hands that showed no tremor from the violence she had just unleashed. Medical secure, Captain. Hostile force eliminated. Casualties among medical staff minimal, patients stable. Her report was delivered in the crisp, professional tone of someone accustomed to post-action briefings. Wells stared at Sarah with a mixture of amazement and confusion. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked, her voice reflecting the shock that everyone in the medical facility was experiencing. That wasn't nursing school training. Sarah finally allowed her carefully maintained cover to drop completely. "My father is retired Navy SEAL," she explained while checking the facility for additional threats. "He insisted I receive the same tactical training as military personnel before I was allowed to serve in forward positions. I've been hiding it because I wanted to be judged as a medical professional." Janet shook her head in disbelief. "All this time, we thought you were just a scared rookie, and you were actually the most qualified person on the base for this kind of situation." Her words carried both admiration and a hint of reproach for the deception Sarah had maintained. The medical training was real, Sarah insisted while helping Dr. Wells check on the wounded soldiers who had been threatened during the attack. "I became a nurse because I wanted to save lives, not take them. But my father always said that sometimes you have to be willing to fight in order to protect the innocent." As the immediate crisis passed, Sarah began treating the minor injuries that some of the medical staff had sustained during the attack. Her hands, which had been wielding weapons with deadly precision moments before, returned to the gentle competence of a skilled medical professional. The base's overall situation gradually stabilized as the remaining attackers were eliminated or forced to retreat. Captain Rodriguez arrived at the medical facility with a security team, expecting to find casualties and devastation. Instead, he found an intact facility defended by a nurse whose true capabilities had remained hidden until the moment they were desperately needed. Word of Sarah's actions spread quickly through the base as the full story emerged. The rookie nurse who had struggled with confidence during her first weeks had single-handedly eliminated an entire assault team while protecting both patients and colleagues from certain death or capture. Dr. Wells submitted a comprehensive report detailing Sarah's actions, recommending her for commendation and requesting that her tactical background be officially recognized in her personnel file. "She saved all our lives," the report concluded. "Her medical skills are excellent, but her combat capabilities are extraordinary." Sarah returned to her regular nursing duties, but her colleagues' perception of her had changed completely. The rookie label disappeared, replaced by respect and admiration from everyone who had witnessed or heard about her actions during the attack. She had proven herself in the most extreme circumstances possible. Captain Rodriguez called Sarah to his office the following day for a private discussion about her background and future role at the base. "Why didn't you tell us about your tactical training from the beginning?" he asked, though his tone carried curiosity rather than criticism. "Because I wanted to be a nurse," Sarah replied simply. "My father trained me for situations like yesterday, but I hoped I would never have to use those skills. I became a medical professional because I believe in healing rather than fighting." Her words reflected the genuine internal conflict she had always felt between her two very different skill sets. The base implemented new security protocols based on Sarah's tactical assessment of the attack, and she was officially designated as both medical personnel and a defensive asset for future emergencies. Her unique combination of healing and combat skills made her invaluable in ways that no one had anticipated. Sarah continued her medical duties with renewed confidence, knowing that her colleagues finally understood her complete capabilities. She had successfully integrated both aspects of her training into a role that allowed her to protect and heal simultaneously. The rookie nurse had become exactly what the dangerous world of military medicine sometimes required: someone skilled enough to save lives and trained enough to defend them when necessary.